Apologies, the last lie told about Kurt Cobain. This one isn't soft, it's jagged and unfinished like a song that cuts out mid-chorus. But if you've ever felt like the story we were told about Kurt Cobain didn't quite add up, you're not alone. Because this isn't just about a rock star who died too young. It's about a crime scene that didn't behave like one, a shotgun that shouldn't have fired, and a note that may not have been his. This is All Apologies, the last lie told about Kurt Cobain. Aberdeen, Washington, population mostly gray. The kind of place where the houses sag, the sky leaks year-round, and dreams rot in the gutters like yesterday's fast food wrappers. You don't grow up in Aberdeen, you survive it. And Kurt? He survived longer than most. He was a skinny little thing, blonde, big blue eyes, sharp like glass. He saw everything, even when he was too young to understand what he was looking at. Born February 20th, 1967, Pisces Sun, Cancer Moon, if you're into that kind of thing. Sensitive, creative, the kind of kid who could make a whole world out of cardboard and string, but couldn't quite survive in this one. His parents split when he was 9. That's when things started to curdle. Everyone likes to point to the divorce. That's what broke him, they say. But the truth's murkier than that. Kurt didn't fall apart overnight. He just started folding inward, one corner at a time, until there wasn't much left to fold. Kurt bounced between relatives like a bad check. His dad couldn't handle him, his mom didn't want to. He was too loud, too wild, too sensitive, and too damn smart for anyone's comfort. He played drums on tabletops, scribbled cartoons in school books, and turned every ounce of pain into something louder than silence. He wasn't violent, and he wasn't cruel, but he was strange, and in a town like Aberdeen, strange is dangerous. He loved animals more than people, loved art more than math, hated authority, but not for rebellion's sake. Kurt just didn't believe people earned the right to tell others what to do. Even as a kid, he could spot a hypocrite from a mile away. That kind of clarity? It's a curse when you're still in grade school. By the time he hit his teens, the cracks were already spidering across the surface. He was sleeping under bridges, getting high, making music with the fury of someone trying to claw their way out of hell. They called him a burnout, a loser. But what they missed was that he was building something. And by the time he finished, it would be loud enough to rattle the windows of every asshole who ever told him he'd never make it out. The thing about legends is, they never look like legends when they start. They look like a couple of kids in a moldy garage trading tapes and blowing fuses, chasing a sound they can't quite name, just trying to make noise loud enough to drown out everything else. For Kurt, that started in Aberdeen, but it came alive in Olympia. It was the late 80s. The Reagan years were dying, but the rot was still in the walls. America was high on consumerism, low on authenticity, and completely deaf to the kids screaming in the basements. Punk was either dying or being packaged. MTV was a neon lie, and on the fringes of the Pacific Northwest, something meaner was growing. Kurt didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to be heard. He was crashing with friends, sleeping in cars, working janitor gigs and watching his heroes burn out. He'd met Chris Novoselic a few years back, tall, lanky, gentle as hell, and the two clicked like a match to kerosene. They played under different names at first. Fecal Matter, Skid Row, Ted Ed Fred, half-joke bands with all serious intentions. But when they locked into that first proper Nirvana lineup, something happened. Something ugly beautiful, something raw. Kurt's voice didn't sing, it shredded. It didn't ask permission, it demanded attention. A scream covered in melody, like pain put to tape. They laid down a demo with Jack and Dino in 1988. Cheap studio, one day. The tape was rough, unpolished, real. Sub Pop heard it and came sniffing. They liked the grunge scene, liked the marketability of it anyway. But Nirvana wasn't playing to sell shirts. They were dragging every ghost out of Kurt's ribcage and plugging it into an amp. They toured in a beat-up van, sleeping on floors, playing shows for beer money and gas fumes. The songs weren't polished. They were bleeding. Negative creep. school, love buzz. Feedback was part of the arrangement. But even then, something set them apart. It wasn't just the songs, it was the presence. Kurt had this way of staring at the floor, slamming his guitar like it had wronged him in a past life, and then, just for a second, locking eyes with the crowd. He didn't want to be your idol. He wanted you to feel what he felt, if only for 3 minutes. And maybe that's what Nirvana was, in those early days. Not a band, not yet. More like a signal flare. But even a flare needs structure. And for a while, the structure just wouldn't hold. They had a drummer problem. Before the world knew the name Dave Grohl, Nirvana went through percussionists like cigarettes, burning fast, leaving ash. First was Aaron Burkhart, local guy, played in the early practice sessions. Gritty but unstable, in and out, and then just out. Then came Dale Crover, Melvin's royalty. He put down tracks on their first real demo. Solid, brutal, but borrowed. He had his own band and it didn't stick. Next, Dave Foster. Great hands, bad timing. A stint in jail ended that one before it started. Then, Chad Channing. Soft-spoken, artsy, a little awkward, but he could play. Chad was the drummer on Bleach, that first full-length album, the one that sounds like a chainsaw having a nervous breakdown. Owed a lot to Chad's rhythmic backbone. His style was looser, more go with the flow, less precision, more instinct. He wasn't a metronome, he was a mood. You can hear it in the way the songs breathe. That raw, live wire feel? Chad helped make that happen. But it didn't last. Kurt was chasing something tighter, something locked in, the kind of drumming that could punch through a wall, not just ride the wave. Maybe Chad's vibe just didn't match the growing weight of what Nirvana was becoming. Or maybe Kurt just needed someone who could match his intensity, beat for beat. Either way, Chad was out. And it wasn't easy. They liked him. He was a friend, a road brother. He'd been there during the lean years, sleeping on floors, sharing cheap food, driving through snowstorms with nothing but demo tapes and duct tape gear. Losing him wasn't just a sound shift, it was a gut punch. But the band was evolving, fast. And sometimes evolution doesn't wait for everyone to catch up. Then came Dave Grohl. All arms, all fury, all finesse. He walked into their orbit in 1990 like a meteor with a kick pedal. Buzz from the Melvins sent him over. Kurt watched him play once and knew, that's the guy. Grohl didn't just keep time, he drove it, like a bulldozer with rhythm. Kurt said it best. When Dave joined the band, that's when it clicked. Suddenly, Nirvana had a spine of steel. Loud was now lethal. They weren't just another noise act, they were a machine, and the engine had just been installed. Next stop, Butch Vig's studio. A little record called Nevermind, and the beginning of the end. It started in the studio, like all magic tricks do. Sound City Studios, Van Nuys, California, 1991. A windowless tomb of cigarette haze, scratched up gear, and ghosts pressed into the walls. Behind the mixing board, Butch Vig. Midwest, calm, wild hair, ears like radar. He didn't talk much, he listened. And what he heard coming out of Kurt Cobain's throat was not the usual. This wasn't just another punk band looking for a record deal. This was something else. Something rough, wounded, hooked like pop but mean like grunge. Kurt didn't like doing more than one take. He didn't like wearing headphones. He just didn't like being told what to do. But Butch knew how to handle it. Kept things loose, didn't push too hard. He let the mess breathe. And somewhere in that tension, between chaos and control, they caught lightning. The songs were already there. Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Lithium, Come As You Are. Poetry screamed through distortion, riffs like detonations. They recorded fast, not because they were lazy, but because they were raw. Too much polish and it would have strangled the spirit of it. Nevermind was sharp, clean, radio ready. But Kurt? He felt like it lost some of its grime in the process. He'd go back and forth on it, one day saying it sounded too slick, the next day proud of the power they captured. That was always the paradox with Kurt, craving perfection but allergic to anything that smelled like compromise. And in that push-pull between studio sheen and basement blood, the thing caught fire. At first, Nevermind wasn't expected to do much. DGC Records gave it a modest push, pressed a few thousand copies, got it on MTV's radar, sent the signal out to radio stations with the hope it might catch a little college buzz. And then it exploded. Smells Like Teen Spirit hit like a pipe bomb in a shopping mall. Nobody saw it coming, not even the band. Suddenly, Kurt was on magazine covers, Nirvana was headlining tours, record stores couldn't keep up. MTV had them on repeat, and the mainstream, so smug, so polished, so full of itself, turned around and called them the voice of a generation. Kurt hated it. He didn't want to speak for anyone. He barely knew how to speak for himself. He was writing about alienation, hypocrisy, and rage, and they were selling it like a brand. Every time someone slapped a label on Nirvana, grunge, Gen X, slacker anthem, Kurt cringed. He wasn't trying to start a revolution. He was trying to survive one. And the pressure, it came fast. Critics dissected his lyrics like sacred text. Journalists speculated on his drug use. Courtney was in the picture now. Loud, brash, brilliant, unstable, and the tabloids had a field day. Fame wrapped its claws around them. Some wore it like armor. Kurt wore it like a noose. He wanted to make music. The industry wanted to make money. And somewhere in the middle of that tug of war, something started to break. The world was finally listening, but it wasn't hearing him. You don't go from sleeping in vans to gold records overnight without losing something in the process. For Kurt, it was peace, privacy, control. Maybe even the last sliver of himself he hadn't already fed to the music. The world saw a rock star, but behind the curtain, he was unraveling. The fame wasn't a crown, it was a spotlight with no off switch. Every cough became a scandal, every lyric became a diagnosis. He was watched, picked apart, misquoted, and misunderstood. And then came Courtney. Courtney didn't just enter his life, she inserted herself. Loud, strategic, dangerous. 4 months after they met, she was pregnant, and Kurt, exhausted, overwhelmed, and increasingly isolated, was cornered into a relationship that looked more like a cage than a commitment. People loved to paint her as some wild muse, but the truth was uglier. Courtney was abusive, manipulative, and violent. She hit him. She screamed at him, isolated him from his friends, threatened him emotionally, financially, and physically. And once she had a baby on the way, Kurt wasn't leaving. They got married in '92. Hawaii. She wore Frances Farmer's old dress. He wore pajamas. It should have been poetic, but it was just tragic. And then came the baby. Frances Bean Cobain, born into a war zone dressed up like a family. Immediately the press circled like flies. Vanity Fair ran a piece that accused Courtney of using while pregnant. The fallout was instant. Child Protective Services got involved. There were court orders, lawyers, tape depositions, and for a while Kurt and Courtney lost custody of their own daughter. It should have been a wake-up call, but instead the spiral got steeper. Kurt had used heroin before. He wasn't shy about that. But now it wasn't just an escape, it was anesthesia. From the fame, from the press, from his stomach issues, and from Courtney. From the marriage and the life he was trapped in. He was shooting up in hotel rooms, nodding off mid-sentence. He overdosed in New York before a show, was revived, and still went on stage. People called it rock star grit. But it was a man dying in slow motion. Some friends tried to help. Many gave up. The record label floated rehab. Courtney said she was trying to save him, but her stories don't add up. Sometimes she was clean, sometimes she wasn't, sometimes she was helping, but more often she was controlling. She wasn't a mess, she was a strategist. And Vanity Fair, that wasn't a mistake. Courtney knew exactly what she was doing when she told a high-profile journalist she'd used heroin during pregnancy. She was media-savvy, image-obsessed, and pathologically self-interested. That article didn't just blow up their personal lives. It isolated Kurt, publicly humiliated him, and confirmed the story she needed him to believe. They all hate me. They all hate us. We're the outcasts. Kurt, It's you and me against the world. It was cult behavior in combat boots and baby barrettes. Lie, confuse, isolate, break them down, then play the victim. And for a while it worked. Kurt stopped trusting people. He pulled back from friends. He stopped reading press. He believed the world had turned on him, that everyone was judging him, attacking her, calling them unfit parents, traitors, freaks. And Courtney? She was right there in his ear, whispering, "They don't get you, but I do." That's not love, that's psychological warfare. Kurt wasn't just addicted to he was trapped in a narrative she built brick by brick with lipstick, lies, and a publishing contract. He didn't scream. He didn't throw punches. He just faded. He folded further inward, one corner at a time. And the world? Too busy buying tickets to notice he was bleeding out behind the scenes. March 4th, 1994. A champagne and Rohypnol overdose. Found unconscious in a luxury hotel suite. Rushed to the hospital. The press called it an accident. The doctors did too. But later, after Kurt vanished, Courtney would call it a suicide attempt, a cry for help. Only by then he wasn't around to correct her. Let's start with what actually happened. Kurt had been in Europe on tour with Nirvana. The In Utero tour was winding through Germany and Italy. On March 1st, 1994, they played their final show at Terminal 1 in Munich. Kurt was sick, suffering from chronic bronchitis and laryngitis. His voice was shot, his body was giving out. The remaining tour dates were canceled. After that, he went to Rome to rest and recover. Courtney flew in to meet him on March 3rd. But this wasn't a romantic reunion. It was a confrontation. Kurt had just found out she was sleeping with Billy Corgan. They fought loudly, and they fought publicly. The marriage was unraveling and Kurt wanted out. That night, he ended up unconscious. He'd taken Rohypnol, a powerful benzodiazepine that was prescribed in Courtney's name, and washed it down with champagne. To this day, no one knows whether Kurt took those pills willingly or if they were slipped into his drink. In multiple interviews, Courtney claimed she found Kurt around 3 to 4 a.m., unconscious, blue in the face. She said she thought he was dead, but she didn't call for help. Not then, not for hours. The hotel's front desk wasn't contacted until around 6 or 6:30 a.m. That's 3 to 4 hours later. She didn't call an ambulance. She didn't scream for help. She just waited. If she thought he was dead, why wait? If she thought he was alive, why delay? The timeline doesn't make sense, and she's never given a straight answer. By the time the ambulance finally arrived, Kurt was clinging to life. His stomach was pumped, his vitals stabilized, and when he woke up, he was furious. Furious at the circus his life had become. Furious at the spin. Furious at Courtney. Kurt told doctors it wasn't a suicide attempt. The doctors in Rome confirmed it was an accident. There were no clinical markers of a suicide attempt noted in the medical report. There was no suicide note. There was, however, a letter, allegedly written in Kurt's writing, found in his hand when he was discovered unconscious. It was addressed to Courtney, and according to multiple people close to him, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a declaration. He was leaving her. He wanted a divorce. He was done. And yet, that letter somehow became part of the suicide narrative. A narrative Kurt never confirmed. A narrative the doctors refuted. A narrative Courtney didn't start pushing until after he vanished. And by then, Kurt wasn't around to push back. After Rome, Kurt returned to Seattle. He told close friends and family he was filing for divorce. He called his attorney and asked to have her removed from his will. He told his manager he was leaving Seattle, maybe even the country. Everyone around him said the same thing. He wasn't planning to die. He was planning to get away. Then came rehab. On March 30th, Kurt checked into the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles. Not because he wanted to, because Courtney was threatening to keep him from seeing his daughter if he didn't go. And if there was one thing in this world that Kurt Cobain adored, it was Frances Bean. She was the one pure thing in a storm of lies, his anchor, his light. He wrote songs for her, drew pictures of her in his journal, called her Bean, talked about protecting her from everything he never got protected from. He would have done anything to stay in her life, even this. The official story says he climbed a 6-foot wall to escape the facility, but that's not how it happened. His wallet was being held at the front desk, and when his body was found days later, the wallet was on him. You don't scale a fence and end up with your personal belongings unless someone handed them over. He didn't run. He just walked out the front door. And Courtney? She filed a missing persons report, only she didn't do it as herself. She pretended to be Wendy Cobain, Kurt's mother. She lied about who she was. She lied about what was happening, and she kept the press distracted while Kurt was already gone. She didn't go looking for him. She stayed in LA. She gave conflicting accounts. She sent people in the wrong direction. And she never told anyone that he'd contacted his lawyer to cut her out of his estate. Because by that point, Kurt was gone. He went home, to Seattle, to the Lake Washington house, and sometime between April 1st and April 5th, he died. But not from heartbreak, not from depression, and not by his own hand. And the story Courtney told the world? That wasn't truth, that was strategy. April 8th, 1994. A spring morning in Seattle, soft rain, cloud-choked sky. The kind of day that doesn't scream tragedy, it just lets it rot quietly. An electrician named Gary Smith shows up at the Lake Washington property. He's there to install a security system, a last-minute request made days earlier. He walks around back, past the garden, up toward the greenhouse. And there, through the window, he sees a body. Slumped on the floor, motionless, a shotgun across the chest. He thinks it's a mannequin at first. It's not. It's Kurt Cobain. The world stops. The headline screams suicide. And just like that, the myth is born. But behind the myth, the evidence told a very different story. Let's start with the toxicology. Kurt's blood contained 1.52 milligrams per liter of morphine, a metabolite of heroin. That's more than 3 times the lethal limit even for a very heavy, chronic user. This wasn't a recreational hit. This was a fatal dose. And critically, Kurt's blood tested positive for 6-MAM, a heroin-specific metabolite that only exists for a short window after injection. We're talking minutes, not hours, usually gone within 30 minutes, often sooner. What that tells us is crucial. This was not a dose that built up over time. It wasn't accumulated in Kurt's system over hours or days. This was a single, massive hit delivered all at once, right before he died. Translation? Kurt had just overdosed, and the effects would have been immediate. He didn't have time to die, recover, pick up a shotgun, chamber a shell, and pull the trigger. That alone would have knocked him flat. At that dosage, unconsciousness occurs in seconds. Death? Minutes. There is no documented case of someone surviving that dose and remaining functional, let alone operating a long-barrel weapon with military-grade coordination. And yet, the official story wants you to believe that after injecting himself with a triple lethal dose of heroin, Kurt Cobain then put the caps back on multiple needles. Yes, those teeny tiny little needle caps. Rolled down and buttoned his shirt sleeves, placed his drug kit neatly off to the side, far enough that it wasn't within his arm's reach, picked up a 20-gauge shotgun, chambered around, positioned it in his mouth, and then pulled the trigger. All this before the drug took effect. That's not suicide, that's logistical fantasy. At 1.52 milligrams per liter of morphine, Kurt would have been unconscious in seconds. His breathing slowed, muscles slack, brain already fading. This was not a man calmly tidying up before his final act. This was a body shutting down. He didn't stage this. He didn't have time to. Someone else did. So now we ask the question the press never did. How does a man who's unconscious, half dead from heroin, fire a shotgun. Let's talk about the gun. Because even the laws of physics had to bend to make the official story work. It was a Remington Model 11, long, heavy, semi-automatic, a shotgun that doesn't play games. It's recoil-operated, meaning it only ejects the spent shell if the shot is fired with force, braced against the body, anchored, stabilized. It definitely would not eject a shell if it was being held in the position with Kurt's grip around the barrel, as noted in the Seattle police report. And Kurt, he wasn't bracing anything. According to the autopsy, he was lying supine when the blast hit, flat on his back. Not seated, not propped up, no shoulder to anchor the gun against, no leverage to cycle the bolt, no time to even stay conscious. And yet, there it was. A spent shell casing ejected like clockwork, and somehow, as if that's not crazy enough, it was found on the wrong side of the body. The ejection port is on Kurt's right. The shell landed on Kurt's left. There shouldn't have been an ejected shell at all, and it gets worse. After the shot, this shotgun, 5 feet long and built like a battering ram, it doesn't flip, or fall, or even slide. It landed perfectly. It rotated 180 degrees, stock up, barrel down, balanced just so across Kurt's chest. That shotgun, it should have fallen, flung, kicked itself halfway across the room. Instead, it was resting on his chest. Neatly, symmetrically, barrel down, stock up. Like it was tucked in for the night. Guns don't land that way, and dead men don't arrange them. And overdose musicians sure as hell don't fire precision contact shots, eject casings sideways, and cradle murder weapons like they're souvenirs. This wasn't chaos, it was performance. Someone killed Kurt Cobain, and they staged it like a scene from a movie they thought we'd never bother to rewind. The rest of the scene? It didn't look like suicide. It looked like a movie set. There was a bag of shotgun shells neatly placed like a prop no one thought to remove. The drug kit? Strangely clean and organized. Syringes capped, nothing spilled, no blood, no mess. Just a tidy little arrangement of tools lined up like it was ready for a photo op. The shotgun balanced across his chest, the rolled down sleeves, the perfectly positioned body. And then, the note. A single sheet of paper. Wait, it was actually an IHOP menu. It was propped on a planter, held in place, not with tape, not folded, not tucked, but with a lone pen stabbed straight through the middle. Like someone was making damn sure it didn't blow away before the cameras arrived. Like someone really wanted you to see it first, before the blood, before the heroin, and before the questions could be asked. Then there's something even stranger. Kurt's hair. Not matted, not blood-soaked, but smooth. Brushed. Almost groomed. This was a man who supposedly fired a shotgun into his mouth. There should have been blood, bone, brain matter, and yet, his hair looked like it was camera-ready. It didn't feel real. It felt like a movie. Because real overdoses are chaotic, ugly, and messy. They happen on bathroom floors, in beds behind locked doors. Needles fall, bodies crumple, things get knocked over. But this was too clean, too convenient. But whoever staged it forgot one thing. Real suicides don't follow storyboards. And whoever did this, they'd clearly never seen the real thing. There's a reason crime scene photos can lie, but the body never does. You can stage a room, clean up a syringe, balance a shotgun on a chest like you're dressing a mannequin, but once the body hits the table, the truth starts leaking out, and it doesn't care about your narrative. Kurt's autopsy told a different story. Let's start with the lungs. They were filled with frothy fluid, a textbook sign of pulmonary edema, the kind of slow drowning that comes from opioid overdose, not gunshot trauma. It's not blood from a blast, it's fluid pulled into the lungs as the heart begins to fail and the brain suffocates. a biological collapse. The froth means one thing. Kurt was alive, barely, as his lungs filled with fluid. He was trying to breathe, not in pain, not in peace, but in panic. This wasn't a calm moment. This was a man suffocating. And then there's what's missing. Despite a shotgun wound to the face, there's no aspirated blood in the lungs. None of the spatter, spray, or inhaled blood you'd expect from a man still breathing when a gunshot blast went off. No blood in the bronchi. No agonal response. Because by the time the gun was fired, Kurt wasn't breathing. Then there's the brain. The medical examiner didn't just find trauma. He found necrosis. Death of the tissue before the shotgun destroyed it. A specific line from the autopsy reads, "Marked hemorrhagic parenchymal disruption with necrosis." In plain terms, his brain was already dying from a lack of oxygen before it was destroyed. And it wasn't just his brain. His liver also showed signs of necrosis, cellular breakdown from prolonged hypoxia or oxygen deprivation. That's not something that happens instantly. It's not caused by trauma. This is what you find in opioid overdose cases where the body begins shutting down organ by organ, starving for oxygen as the lungs fail and the blood can no longer circulate properly. In a typical gunshot suicide, the internal organs don't show widespread necrosis because death is fast, instant. There's no time for the brain or liver to rot from the inside. But in an overdose, this is exactly what you find. Frothy fluid in the lungs, no aspirated blood, necrotic brain and liver tissue, no agonal response. And heroin still mid-metabolism in the bloodstream, marked by the presence of 6-MAM, the forensic timestamp of a rapid, recent injection. Kurt didn't die in a flash of violence. He died slowly, organ by organ, drowning on the inside. And there's a little more to say about the blood, or more accurately, the lack of it. Kurt's left hand, the one that was supposedly gripping the barrel of the shotgun when it discharged, was clean. No soot, no splatter, no biological blowback, just a pale, untouched hand resting peacefully where there should have been absolute carnage. A contact shotgun blast to the mouth, especially with the barrel inverted and fired upward, would have sent a violent spray of blood, tissue, and soot downward across the hands, arms, and chest. It's not a maybe, it's a certainty. But the forensic photos show none of that. No blood coating the hands, no residue on the sleeves, no blowback on walls or ceiling either. And if that shot happened while Kurt was still alive, while Kurt's heart was pumping, there would have been blood everywhere. Instead, it looks like the blood took the day off, or the scene was cleaned. Either way, it's one more thing that doesn't belong in a suicide. People like to say he did both, heroin and a shotgun to be sure, as if he was some kind of tragic overachiever in self-destruction. Even Courtney Love once said, "Rock stars overdose all the time, but a shotgun? That's final." But here's the thing. The overdose was final. The shotgun came after. The toxicology proves it. The autopsy confirms it. The brain and liver necrosis seal it. This wasn't a man doubling down on death. This was a man who had already been killed, and someone added a shotgun to make sure the world got a show. Because overdoses are ambiguous, but a shotgun? That's theater. That's a headline. That's a story you don't question. Unless you're us. You'd think when a world-famous musician is found dead in his home with a shotgun across his chest and enough heroin in his veins to kill 3 people, the police would treat it with a little care. Maybe even do their jobs. But the Seattle Police Department didn't investigate Kurt Cobain's death. They buried it. From the moment they stepped into that greenhouse, they saw what they wanted to see. A junkie, a gun, a note. And they called it a day. So let's talk about what they didn't do. Photos were taken, but not by the lead detectives. The only images we have come from a patrol officer with a throwaway camera, like he was cataloging someone's garden party. They didn't test for gunshot residue, didn't swab Kurt's hands, didn't confirm whether he'd ever actually fired that weapon. They didn't dust the shotgun for prints that day, or the next. They waited nearly a month, and when they finally did, They claimed no usable prints were found, not on the barrel, not on the trigger, not on the shells, not even on the pen stabbed through the so-called suicide note. They didn't secure the scene. They didn't measure lividity. They didn't reconstruct a timeline. They didn't document the body before it was moved. The SPD ruled this a suicide within hours, before the autopsy, before the toxicology, before evidence even had time to cool. And the people closest to Kurt? They were never interviewed. No formal statement from Michael Callie DeWitt, who was living in the house. No questioning of Courtney Love, who filed a missing persons report under Kurt's mother's name. No follow-up with Dylan Carlson, who helped Kurt buy the shotgun, had access to the house, and still somehow didn't know where he was. Even the electrician Gary Smith wasn't questioned in depth. And he wasn't just there by chance. Courtney Love sent him to that house, and not just to the main residence. Courtney sent him directly to the greenhouse, a detached structure rarely used, allegedly overlooked in the initial search, and yet somehow Courtney knew that was where to send him. The police never asked her how, never asked why she picked that part of the property, never asked why she managed to dispatch someone right to the room where Kurt's body was waiting. It wasn't intuition, it was knowledge, and they didn't question it. It wasn't an investigation, it was a rubber stamp. And then there was the note. The so-called suicide note was found stabbed into a planter with a single pen. Most people only remember the last few lines. I love you, please keep going. But the bulk of the note? It's not a suicide letter, it's a retirement letter, a farewell to music, not to life. And those last 4 lines? Written in different handwriting, different angle, different size, different style. Forensic handwriting analysts have flagged their inconsistency for years. And then came the bombshell. Courtney's own lawyer, Rosemary Carroll, found a practice sheet in Courtney's bag. Someone had been rehearsing individual letters, copying the shape and style of the final lines in the note found next to Kurt. Same slant, same loops, same inconsistencies, an imitation, a mimic, a forgery in motion. You don't practice someone else's handwriting unless you're planning to fake it. And just like everything else, the SPD ignored it. They didn't test the paper, they didn't log it as evidence, they held on to it for a few days and then gave it back to Courtney. Because if the note falls apart, the whole story collapses. The headlines were fast, brutal, final. Kurt Cobain dead at 27. An addict takes his own life. They didn't wait for the autopsy, didn't wait for the toxicology, didn't wait for the truth. Because the narrative was too perfect to ruin with facts. A tortured genius, a shotgun, a needle. Tragic, tidy, and palatable, as long as no one looked too closely. And the Seattle police? They didn't. They took one look at the body, the note, the scene, and slapped a label on it before the blood was even dry. No gunshot residue test, no fingerprints, no interviews with key witnesses, no reconstruction, and no second opinion. The media turned it into a morality tale. The police turned it into a paperwork formality. And the people closest to Kurt? They were shut out, ignored, or steamrolled. But there was something they didn't tell you. Something that should have been disclosed from the beginning. The medical examiner assigned to Kurt Cobain's autopsy, Dr. Nicholas Hartshorn, had a prior personal relationship with Courtney Love. Before stepping into forensics, Hartshorn was deeply entrenched in the Seattle punk scene. He booked shows, ran in the same circles as Kurt and Courtney, and, according to multiple local sources, parted with Courtney long before she was famous. Some described them as close. Others described them as intimate. Either way, it should have triggered a mandatory conflict of interest. No recusal was filed, no supervisor flagged it. No independent pathologist was brought in to review the findings. Instead, the man with documented personal history with the prime beneficiary of Kurt's estate, a woman who faked a missing persons report, gave contradictory statements, and sent an electrician directly to the hidden location of the body, was the same man who signed off on Kurt Cobain's death as suicide. That's not a red flag, that's a 5-alarm fire. And yet, nobody challenged it. because challenging it meant pulling a thread that would unravel the entire story. And no one in power wanted to know what was on the other end of that string. Over the years, multiple petitions have circulated demanding that the case be reopened. Thousands of fans, citizens, and even forensic professionals have called for transparency, for the release of the full autopsy slides, the crime scene photos, toxicology backups. Seattle police have ignored them all. To this day, key evidence remains locked away, and what we've seen is only what they choose to let us see. The one man who could have called bullshit, the medical examiner, had a history with the one person who had the most to gain. And Hartshorn? He never gave a public statement. He never answered questions. He died in 2002, a skydiving accident. One more ghost in a story full of them. And then, years later, someone else came forward. Joe Burns, a man who lived in Seattle in the 90s and spent time in the same circles as Kurt, says he was there the night Kurt Cobain died. He didn't read about it. He didn't theorize about it. He says he witnessed it. According to Joe, Kurt didn't die alone. He didn't die by suicide. He was already unconscious from heroin, and someone else pulled the trigger. Joe described the scene in chilling detail, down to the TV dinner Kurt had eaten hours earlier, a detail eerily consistent with what the autopsy found in his stomach contents. He never went to the media, he never wrote a book, he never sought fame. He spoke out only decades later, after years of silence and fear. And he's not alone. There are others, witnesses, insiders, people who saw or heard things they were too afraid to share, until now. Because the truth doesn't disappear, it just waits for someone brave enough to drag it into the light. Kurt didn't get justice. He got a story written by someone else. And the longer that story goes unchallenged, the more people start mistaking fiction for fact. But not here, not us. Because this isn't about conspiracy, it's about contradiction. It's about a case that was closed before it was opened. A man whose death was staged like a suicide, and a system too lazy, too biased, or too complicit to question it. The truth was never convenient, but it's still out there. And we're not done digging. They said it was suicide. Case closed, move on. But the ghosts don't sleep, and neither do the questions. Because 30 years later, the smoke hasn't cleared. It's thick, heavy, refusing to drift away. And deep inside it, the smoking guns are still glowing. The weapon is still here, the Remington Model 11. 5 feet of steel and recoil. It was supposed to tell the story. One man, one shot, one final act. But when we picked it up and tested it ourselves, the story cracked in half. Maybe justice isn't a courtroom. Maybe it's just a light left on. A voice that doesn't blink when it says, "That's not how he died." Maybe it's enough to pull back the curtain and name the dust for what it is. Not memory, but neglect. They said he was troubled, sick, lost. Too much heroin, too much fame, too much pain. But maybe what really killed Kurt Cobain was the silence after. The silence of police who didn't investigate, of friends who didn't speak. The silence of a city that chose to look away because it was easier than looking in. But Kurt didn't go quietly. His body tells us that. The lungs, the brain, the blood, or lack of it. He didn't pull the trigger. He was already gone. And someone else made sure that when the world found him, they'd see exactly what they were supposed to see. A sad boy, a gun, a story wrapped in tragedy, and tied with a neat little bow of a forged goodbye. That's not death, that's direction. But the truth? It lingers. And tonight, maybe it's enough just to know that some of us are still listening. So now we dim the lights, we fold the files, and we leave the ghost to pace the greenhouse floor a little longer. But if you listen closely, beneath the noise, beneath the silence, you'll find him. Still here, still waiting.